Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Daybreak, the Korean government unveils decades-old documents listing personal information of Koreans victimized during Japan's colonial rule in the early 20th century. The latest revelation is expected to help spur victims' compensation. The main rival political parties wrangling over government agencies' alleged election meddling interrupts the parliament's first interpellation session of the Park Geun-hye administration. Plus, a Lebanon-based Sunni jihadist group linked to Syrian rebels carries out twin suicide bombings at the Iranian embassy in Beirut, killing dozens and injuring scores more. Daybreak begins now.
You're watching Daybreak on Wednesday, November 20th. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul. The Korean government has unveiled a new stack of decades-old documents containing evidence of Japan's colonial-era atrocities. Our Hwang Sung-hee explains how the revelations come as more victims in Korea are stepping up efforts to claim private compensation.
The 67 volumes of documents unveiled by the National Archives of Korea on Tuesday list more than 200,000 victims from Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early 1900s. They include those killed during the March 1st independence movement and the Kanto massacre, as well as those forced into labor by Japan's colonial authorities. The documents contain detailed information that had not previously been disclosed.
It is expected to be useful in determining the candidates eligible for compensation as it provides information like their dates of birth and addresses, which were unavailable in previous documents.
The documents were found at the South Korean embassy in Tokyo in June and are believed to have been prepared in the 1950s to be used in negotiations between South Korea and Japan. The findings come as South Korean victims of forced labor are seeking compensation from Japanese companies, and they're expected to serve as key evidence since 65 of the 67 documents contain information on forced workers. While Japan claims that the issue of compensation for forced labor was settled under a bilateral agreement in 1965, South Korean courts have ruled that the individual rights of South Koreans to seek compensation remain intact. Seoul's foreign ministry said the new documents once again highlight the wartime crimes committed by Japan.
It shows once again how much wrong Japan did during its colonial rule of Korea. Japan must acknowledge this fact.
The government is currently conducting a thorough review of the documents, and already it has identified more than 1,000 victims who were previously unknown. And it expects to confirm more victims of Japan's colonial era once it goes through all the documents. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
And staying with Japan's denial of its colonial-era atrocities, the Korean government has called on Japan to face up to its past wrongdoings after a top Japanese official publicly defamed one of Korea's most highly respected independence fighters. This comes after Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga on Tuesday called An Jung-geun a criminal for assassinating the first Japanese resident general to Korea, Hirobumi Ito. Korea's foreign ministry said Japan needed to humbly face history and repent for its imperialistic aggression while understanding the emotions of victimized nations. China has also waded into the row, calling on a well-respected figure in China for his work as an anti-Japanese activist. Korea and China have been working to establish a monument commemorating An, and the issue was discussed this week during talks between President Park Geun-hye and Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi. And at the nation's National Assembly, tensions between the rival parties remain high as ever. The first day of a 5-day parliamentary questioning session was interrupted by a walkout by opposition party lawmakers. Business resumed, but the day ended with little progress. Our Kim Young-gil reports on the ongoing political impasse.
The ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Democratic Party continue to bicker over the DP's demand for a special probe into allegations that state institutions meddled in last year's presidential elections. Tuesday's interpellation session at the National Assembly was shrouded in confrontation, with the DP reiterating its call for a special council probe into the election scandal. On Monday, the Saenuri Party rejected that proposal, instead accepting a separate one that a special parliamentary committee undertake the task of reforming the nation's intelligence agency. Without much progress to speak of on Tuesday, the interpellation session broke down with DP lawmakers walking out. They did so in protest after Saenuri Party lawmaker Lee Woo-hyun criticized DP lawmaker Kang Ki-jung for his minor scuffle with presidential security agents outside the National Assembly building on Monday. The opposition party called for an official apology from the ruling party and Representative Lee. The DP lawmakers also filed a motion Tuesday calling for the dismissal of 2 ministers from the Justice Ministry and the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs, and the head of the National Intelligence Service for their alleged attempts to cover up allegations of state interference in last year's presidential campaign. The interpellation session is scheduled to resume on Wednesday with a focus on national security and unification. However, with the 2 main political parties paralyzed over matters of contention, there's doubt that they'll be able to set aside their differences and make any progress. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A measure to provide the most needy seniors here in Korea with a basic monthly allowance has finally cleared the cabinet. If approved by the president and parliament, many senior citizens should see their pension benefits go up starting next year. Our Oh Jin-ju has more.
The cabinet on Tuesday confirmed a plan giving out a maximum of $190 as basic pension payouts to the lower 70% income bracket of senior citizens aged 65 and above. The finalized bill specifies a monthly minimum of $95 and a maximum of $190, addressing criticisms that an earlier proposal allowed the government to possibly change payment schemes in the future after it once scaled back from President Park Geun-hye's election campaign pledge. The bill also mandates a review of the monthly payout every 5 years based on the income level of average senior citizens, the current inflation rate, and the rise in income level of those joining the separate national pension program. However, it keeps intact the plan's main point of contention by making the length of senior citizen subscription to the other pension program the basis for lowering payments of the basic pension program. That clause, which led to the resignation of a former health minister, created strong backlash from opposition parties and some civic groups who opposed the idea of penalizing subscribers of the other pension scheme. Now that the bill will be passed on to the Assembly, attention is being drawn as to whether the opposition party will approve the scaled-back version of President Park's original campaign pledge. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Korea and Kyrgyzstan have agreed to boost cooperation in the sectors of energy, trade, and economy. Meeting with the visiting Kyrgyz president at the presidential office on Tuesday, President Park Geun-hye signed an agreement on setting up a legal foundation for Korea to provide free aid to Kyrgyzstan by inviting Kyrgyz trainees to Korea, along with sending Korean experts, volunteer workers, equipment, and goods. The Kyrgyz president's visit is expected to serve as an opportunity for the Park administration to boost its cooperation with Central Asian countries. Ruling Saenuri Party lawmaker Chung Moon-won has been questioned by prosecutors over suspicions he illegally obtained and leaked a classified transcript of the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit. The transcript holds the details of talks between late South Korean President Roh Moo-hyun and then North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, and became a political hot potato after the Saenuri Party claimed ahead of last year's presidential election that Roh had offered to give up the Western Sea border, more commonly known as the Northern Limit Line, during the meeting. Speaking to reporters before entering the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office on Tuesday, Chung said he would sincerely respond to the investigation, but stressed there were remarks about giving up the NLL during the summit. He said Kim Jong-il demanded Seoul surrender the NLL in exchange for a peace zone in the West Sea, and No responded positively to the demands. Prosecutors later confirmed that Kim did use the term giving up the NLL during the summit.
If you want the latest news from Korea and around the world.
Return to the negotiations.
President Park Geun-hye plans, given the current circumstances.
On your way to work or at home.
Ministry. The legislature will convene a...
Tune into Daybreak on Arirang TV.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said Tuesday the OECD has released its latest economic forecast for Korea, reflecting lower expectations for the country's growth rate in 2014. The new report, however, expressed confidence that the country would still be able to break out of its economic slump in the coming year. Our Polly explains.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development says that Korea's economy will pick up in 2014 as it continues to recover from a prolonged economic slowdown. According to the OECD's economic forecast released Tuesday, the local economy will find its greatest gains from a rebound in global exports and business investment over the next 2 years. The biannual report that assesses economic trends showed that Korea's gross domestic product is expected to post a 2.7% growth rate on year for 2013, up 0.1% from its estimate back in May. As for its 2014 economic forecast, the OECD said Korea's GDP would jump 3.8% in 2014 on year. That's slightly lower from earlier this year, due in part to concerns over the nation's high level of household debt. The Paris-based organization said the mounting household debt problem is likely to hamper private consumption growth through 2015. Other concerns included Korea's declining working-age population and falling prices in the housing market. The report did acknowledge that the Korean government is addressing these issues head-on, with stimulus packages that include tax relief measures and restructuring personal debt. In comparison to other major economies, the OECD ranks Korea's future economic growth rate near the top of the list. Output growth is projected to stay within the 4% range in both 2014 and 2015, thanks to a moderate increase in world trade. Though Korea remains sensitive to global economic conditions due to its reliance on exports, the OECD says the country's budget surplus and low public debt will lay the foundation for faster growth and help it weather market uncertainties in the near future. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
The Asian tigers, a term coined to describe fast-growing Asian economies from the 1960s to the 1990s, have been slowing down in recent years, weighed down by their aging populations. However, as our Yurian reports, Korea could soon have a second wind.
It appears the era of rapid growth is over for the Asian tigers. The countries have seen their average GDP growth slow to an average of 3% in the past 5 years, only a third of what they enjoyed back in the 1980s when they earned the title. But a new report from Credit Suisse shows that the four still could double their current pace of expansion by fully exploiting their labor potential. It notes that nearly 40% of the growth in GDP per capita came from demographic factors during the 1980s. The tigers have a much younger population relative to G7 countries and boast untapped female labor force that could push up the nation's GDP. The report says the four economies' labor force will grow at a pace as high as 1.3% in the 2010 to 2015 period. This far exceeds the average of G7 countries, excluding Canada, which stands at a mere 0.2%. The biggest potential lies with the underutilized but well-educated female workforce. In Korea, for example, women are 22% less engaged in economic activity than men. That compares with a 15% gap for the G6 countries. If Korea and the other Asian tigers could give equal opportunities for women and bring about reforms to engage their citizens to work longer, Credit Suisse analysts say the Asian tigers could roar back to strength. Yurian, Arirang News.
If you live in Korea, you may notice a difference in your electricity bill starting this month. The government is raising rates by an average of 5.4% from Thursday to rein in consumption and reduce the risk of power shortages. Our Han Da-eun has the details.
Korea has raised electricity rates for the first time in 10 months by the biggest margin in 3 years in an attempt to reduce the nation's ever-rising energy consumption. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced on Tuesday that it'll raise electricity rates by an average of 5.4% starting this Thursday. Rates for the industrial sector will see the biggest jump by 6.4%. Electricity rates for general use, mainly for large office and department store buildings, will rise 5.8%, and those for households will increase by 2.7%. It's the nation's first step in trying to streamline the current energy rate system, which has long been criticized for being inefficient.
The aim of the energy rate system reform is to fundamentally solve problems stemming from the nation's excessive energy consumption by rationalizing the pricing system between electricity and other forms of energy.
Officials added that the relative inexpensiveness of electricity prices in Korea has led to an abnormal increase in energy consumption, which could eventually result in power shortages. And taking into account public criticism that electricity rates for industrial use have been significantly lower than those for households, officials said they adjusted the rates for private consumption by the lowest level possible. From next year, the government also plans to impose an individual consumption tax on electricity-generating flaming coal, while reducing taxes on LNG and kerosene oil, which can be used as alternatives to electricity. And then, Arirang News.
At least 23 people were killed and more than 140 injured Tuesday in a double suicide bombing outside the Iranian embassy in Beirut. Iran's official news agency says the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was not hurt, but the cultural attaché of the embassy was among the dead. Iran backs the Lebanese Shia militant group Hezbollah, which has sent fighters to Syria to help the Assad regime. A Sunni jihadist group has claimed responsibility for the attack. The UN Security Council has condemned the bombings, and the U.S. said the attack was senseless and despicable.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all. Now, despite the kickoff time being 11 p.m. Korea time, many fans stayed up to watch the Korean national football team face off against Russia, hoping it'll be all worth it. And, of course, going into the game here, just 6 minutes into the match, it's the big man Kim Shin-wook who finds the back of the net, giving Korea the early 1-0 lead. Kim Shin-wook finally getting the goal he needs here, but just 6 minutes later, the South Korean defense caught sleeping as Fedor Smolov sends one past Chung Sung-yong, and all of a sudden, it's 1-1. Stays that way going into the second half of the match, but it's Dmitry Tarasov who scores for the Russians once again, giving them the 2-1 lead. And despite the Taeguk Warriors trying to find the equalizer, that's how things end as Russia takes this match 2-1, your final score. And moving on to golf, where after clinching the LPGA Player of the Year title, Park Geun-hye will now go after the top earning and the lowest scoring average for the second straight year. Now, with the season's last event, the CME Group title holders taking place this week, Park Geun-hye is currently in the lead with a little over $2.39 million in earnings this season, with Suzanne Pettersson right behind at just $100,000 behind. Meanwhile, Park is currently third in the lowest scoring average at 69.9, with Stacey Lewis in the lead with 69.48. Now, it's going to be a tough finish for the lowest scoring average, but anything can happen. going into the last event of the season. And moving on, it's been a great year for another female athlete as we now move over to sports climbing this time. Now, Kim Jae-in, who's climbed up to #1 in the World Cup ranking, is now ranked #1 in the world. The 25-year-old sports climber, who's been in the spotlight as of late after winning several World Cup events this season, finished 4th in the recent World Cup event in Slovenia. The 4th place finish gave her enough points to climb up to #1 in the world ranking. And believe it or not, it's not the first time that she's ranked #1 in the both rankings, with her accomplishing the same feat back in 2010. And now moving on to some Tuesday night KBL action as we have one game that took place last night. Wonju Dongbu Promi looking to end their 10-game losing streak as they went up against the Incheon Itilan Elephants. Let's take a look at the highlights. Of course, going into the game here, first quarter of the game, 5 different Dongbu players scoring in the first quarter as they take a slim 22-21 lead. With the second quarter of the game, Ricardo Pau leading the way for Incheon as they tied this game 41-41 going into halftime. Third quarter, still a close game, but Incheon managed to rally back to take a slim 2-point lead going into the fourth quarter, before running away with it in the fourth quarter, with Ricardo Pau finishing off with 27 points and 7 rebounds as Incheon takes this game 84-71, with Dongbu now on an 11-game losing streak. And now finishing things off with some Tuesday night VLeague action as Daejeon KGC beat GS Caltex in straight sets 3-0 over on the women's side. So with that said, let's take a look at the highlights from the men's side as Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs took on Uri Card. Of course, going into the game here, a rather close game to start things off as Samsung barely takes the first set 25-23. Second set equally as tough for the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs as they steal the second set 30-28. Uri Card looking to bounce back in the third set, but holy cow, Leo Martinez with 42 attack points in this game, helping Samsung take the third set with ease 25-18 to take this game in straight sets 3-0. And with that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your latest weather forecast. Well, I know I've been telling you almost every morning that this morning would be the coldest of this season, but I have to repeat myself again today. Get ready for a very chilly morning. Temperatures here in Seoul and surrounding areas drop to -3, so it's really cold out there. And it makes it really hard to get out of bed, right? Well, temperature at the moment is around -1 degree Celsius, but it feels like -4 here in the capital. So please cover up by wearing a muffler, hat, and gloves. And sky-wise, we will have mainly clear skies throughout the day and across the nations. But even with the sunlight and slightly higher afternoon highs, it won't feel any milder than yesterday, so please stay bundled throughout the day. Now, tomorrow should be similar to a tad milder than today, as Seoul will hike up to 9 degrees Celsius, so it should feel slightly warmer under clear sky. So, can we expect a warm-up this week? Well, moving into weekend, we are expecting a small warm-up with low temperatures rebound to positive signs, but we have a couple of more days to wake up in the sub-zero temperatures. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. So we'll make up to 6 degrees Celsius, which is 43 degrees in Fahrenheit, while Gwangju sees a high of 9 and Busan will get up to 11. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will get up to 12, Daejeon and Dokdo will top out at 8 and 7 respectively, and Mount Kumgang will be a cold -3. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all from me at this hour. Don't forget to bundle up tight before heading out, and hope you have a wonderful day.
In regards to an earlier report on the inter-Korean summit transcript, there was no reference to prosecutors confirming that Kim did use the term giving up the NLL during this summit. And that's it for this Wednesday edition of Daybreak. Thank you for watching.